Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to paint these cute sneakers in gouache, and there is a real-time version of this tutorial up in Critique Club right now if you would like to see all 2 hours of this wondrous painting. Oh my goodness. So you're probably thinking, Lindsay, why in heck are you drawing sneakers? I mean, really? Well, so I got back from a walk, and you know the kids' shoes are always all over the living room, but you know what? My kids are going to be going to college this fall, and there's not going to be shoes all over the living room, and I just looked at those little Chuck Taylors sitting there, and I thought, aw, it's not going to have shoes all over the living room floor in a few months. They're all going to be off living their lives and doing their thing and getting all edumacated. And so I was feeling nostalgic, and I thought this will be a great subject for a painting that's meaningful to me. Might not be meaningful to you, but probably isn't. But it is for me because, yeah, it's just something that I've taken for granted and been annoyed by, but I'm going to miss it, you know? So I started off just by sketching with a watercolor pencil. And this is just one of the Derwent watercolor pencils, kind of like in, I think it's, oh shoot, mineral green. That's the name of it. Mineral green. I remembered. And I'm just trying to get the basic shapes of everything down. You can see the reference photo in the corner there. And I don't need too many details here. I started to put in the laces, but I'm like, I don't need that. I'm going to be doing gouache, and that's all going to get covered up. And there's a swatch of the gouache set that I'm using. It's actually a set that I just reviewed on my channel. It's from, well, actually, it was the artsy company that reached out to me to ask if I wanted to review it. They had a set of 24 gouache. It was my favorite. I still use it, but I'm using it up, and it's no longer available to purchase. So I was really excited to hear they were coming out with a new set. Even though it has different branding on it, it's very opaque. It's very rich. The pigmentation load is high. It's got a nice matte finish, and it's cheaper than the Miyahime gouache, which was also pretty cool. So I will link that down below. You can find the review on my channel a couple videos ago if you want to go see the update and you know, probably get way more information about that gouache than you want, but there it is anyway. And I really liked how the sneakers are just sitting on the, you know, fuddy-duddy carpet that we have, you know, and I thought that's kind of a nice contrast. And I thought about bringing the sneakers downstairs, but I'm like, they were just so perfectly askew just there on the floor that I'm like, I can't reset that up. So I took my phone out of my pocket and I took a few photos of it, and that's what my reference photo is. And I just thought, yeah, that contrast of kind of like an old-fashioned fuddy-duddy rug with some funky Chuck Taylors that I think my daughter had designed on the Converse website. You could pick, like, so it's like darker green actually on the outside, lighter green on the inside, and the tongue is like yellow ochre. They're pretty cool. She's a pretty fashionable kid. Fun fact, I was voted best dressed when I was in high school, and she was also voted best dressed while she's in high school. Now I look like a sketchy hobo all the time. So I'm like, Lila, it's a window to your future right here. Poor child, she's probably horrified. But anyway, I just basically wanted to kind of put in that rug pattern. I sprayed the paper because it was drying a little too fast, and then I kind of went in with some white to lighten everything up because it gotten a little darker. Gouache will have a little bit of a shift. It tends to shift a smidgen darker, I found, except for really dark colors can shift a smidgen lighter. But you get used to it. You get used to the shifting the more you use it. And I use my atomizer, that really fine mist sprayer. I think it's meant for like plants and hair and stuff, but it's perfect for keeping your surface wet. And the paper that I'm using is actually one that I didn't really care for too much because it was touted as 100% cotton. But I was planing on that. I'm like, there's no way that's 100% cotton. It felt like the Fabriano Studio 25% cotton paper. So I contacted the company Artbeak that released it, and I said, I don't think that's 100% cotton. I think there's been a mistake somewhere. And so they said, oh, our Italian company where we had it made told us it was 100% cotton. So that I'm like, yeah, I bet that's the Fabriano Studio, and something must have got lost in translation because this isn't cotton. But but since I had the paper, and I'm like, oh well, I'm gonna use it up for some swatches. I really like the way the gouache swatched on that paper, so I'm like, well, this block of paper might be great for working with gouache, because I found, like, with paper where like the sizing's gone bad, it works great for gouache because gouache doesn't need that absorbency in the paper. It doesn't need it's not transparent, so you don't need to have the paper shining through. So if you have watercolor paper that you don't like, that's not working well for you, use it for gouache. It will be fine. I promise you, it'll work fine for that. You can even do gouache underpaintings and then do like pastel or colored pencil on top. Gouache is a beautiful matte, toothy finish that takes pencil and pastel really nicely. So don't throw it away. You can definitely use it. I would do that before I would try to resize the paper personally, unless it was really expensive cotton paper. Even then, if you also use pastels and gouache and pencils, I think I would just use it for those medias and get some fresh paper for a watercolor, because watercolor paper, watercolor is much more finicky, I believe, than other mediums, and the expense of resizing watercolor paper that's gone bad, if you can use the paper for another medium that you already use and just buy new watercolor paper, I think that's a more economical way to go. And then just try to keep your watercolor paper stored in a climate controlled environment. I keep all my full sheet, bougie, expensive watercolor paper under my bed in a flat file, because it's doesn't fluctuate. The humidity and the temperature doesn't fluctuate much in my bedroom, but in my studio, it can fluctuate from like, upper 60s in the summer to, lower 50s in the winter. So I want to, except when I have the heat on, I don't heat it all the time. So I'm just heating it for, I turn on the heat when I start to work, and then I turn it off and just let the residual heat keep it warm for the rest of the day. So it's just something to think about. If you don't stockpile your paper unless you have a place to keep it. And there's no reason why, if you don't have a really good place to keep it, that you can't. But it's just a good idea to keep that in mind. I know when you find a good deal on watercolor paper, you just want to, grab it because it's expensive, but don't buy more than you can use up in a certain amount of time or that you can store properly. So back to the art, I'm just blocking in the colors with the gouache on the sneakers and just trying to get an overall base coat on everything. I find that once you get that first coat down, it's really easy to put a color on top and then use a damp brush to blend it in. You can go pretty slow. You don't have to rush. It's not like acrylic paint where you've got to blend it while it's still wet. With the gouache, you can always rework that surface, and that's what I really like about it. I don't find great joy painting with acrylics. Sometimes I paint with acrylics. I like the golden open acrylics because they do stay much more workable longer. And I've used the paint retarders in the mix, and I find it unsatisfying. The golden open acrylics are the exception. I really do enjoy those, but generally, I use acrylics more for like base coating things or for craft projects and stuff like that. But I really like painting with gouache because it's kind of like bridging my favorite mediums like watercolor. It's got the ease of, I take the lid off my jelly gouache palette and I can just scoop out what I need and pop the lid back on and I'm good to go. I don't have to mess with tubes. I don't have to, mess with anything. It's easy peasy. I like that. And it's also gives me the satisfaction of having like an opaque media that I can blend and I can keep reworking, kind of like oils do, where oils has such a large open time and you can keep blending until you get it just right and then you leave it alone to dry. I like that. But I like the fact that I can do a painting in gouache or get like a base layer down with gouache, and then I can keep reworking into it until I'm happy with that layer. And then if I don't want to rework that layer at all, then I can go over it with colored pencil or I can go over it with pastel. I can use it with so many other medias, and it's just such a wonderful, versatile media like that. Now these gouaches, these jelly gouaches, I've never done a Lightfast test with them. I might with that swatch sheet. I might put some black strips of cardstock down and pop it in this high transom window that I have that actually does get pretty good sun. It's actually going into summer here in Maine, so I might be able to get enough sun. And just seeing if it changes at all. I wouldn't trust my results just because I'm not a scientist and I live very far away from the equator. But if I saw any color changing, it would be good to know. They do make Lightfast gouache now. Gouache has never really been known for its Lightfast capabilities. It never was needed for that. It's a matte paint that's been designed for really reproduction. So you would do your painting as an illustrator, you'd have it photographed, and then that would be that. You could either keep it in a dark flat file if you don't want it to fade, or, whatever. It's not really made to be displayed. But now there are companies making highly light fast gouache. Schminke and M. Graham come to mind. So I don't know how these jelly gouache companies would fare. I guess I probably could look online. Probably somebody's done light fast testing. I just enjoy it. And honestly, my work is mostly made to be shared online on YouTube and classes, things like that. Then it pretty much goes in a cabinet. It would be curious to see how well these paints last. Maybe I should do a light fast test. I tend to avoid the fluorescents just because those, and no matter what, even if you're buying like really expensive paints, your fluorescents are going to fade. I try to stick to more of the tried and true tones. So like it looks like I have burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, black, white, gray. I've got a little, I don't know what that green. I have no idea what the basis of that green would be. That would probably be the one I would be the most worried about. But these are all fairly muted earthy tones, so I would be surprised if I had a big amount of fading in any of these, especially if you mat it under glass, which is what I would do with works on paper that I wanted to display. So, I mean, I'm not too worried about it, but it's something to keep in mind. I think if you're just learning though, and you're playing and you're just trying to figure out whether you like it, these jelly gouache sets are awesome. And this one, I think it was running around $38. And I think there was a coupon on top of that, but it was 56 colors, and each pot of gouache is 30 ml, which is equivalent to 2 of the standard size gouache tubes, the 15 ml standard tube. So it's a lot of paint, and you would get a lot of paintings under your belt before you decided whether you wanted to invest in pricey colors. And then you'd be able to see what colors you actually use the most of and only buy those, so that, you would save on buying colors you're not going to use. You could just bring your swatch to the store and say, I use this color, this color, this color, and then you could match it. So that would be my advice. And I just think it's fun. I think it's a fun media, and especially when it's inexpensive, you don't have to worry about it. Now, I did take a pastel because I wanted some really soft shadow behind the sneakers. I could see that in my reference photo, and I just put some in there, and then I thought it was too dark, so I'm using a kneaded eraser just to dab off some of it. But what I wanted to do really with the pastel, and later on with colored pencils, I wanted to grab some of the texture from the paper because I thought that would be a nice contrast and make it look kind of a little bit more like a rug. I really like how that background came out. Now, one thing I'm going to warn you about, and I'm not sure if you'll see it in the time lapse or not, but in the real time version, it was very apparent. I splashed a drop of water onto my surface and didn't notice it right away. And when I blotted it off, I had a big bald spot on the painting. So that's something you do have to worry about, because that paint's going to sit on top of the paper. It doesn't soak in. So if you drop a drip of water on it and you don't see it right away, you can end up lifting up that paint, and then you have to retouch it. But luckily, retouching in gouache is much easier than retouching in acrylics. I think that's probably why so many illustrators use gouache, is because you can rework it so easily, and also it dries so much faster than oils, and you can still kind of get that look. Now, this product I'm using here is the new Arctics acrylic paint pens, but they're weird. They're not like the kind that you have to pump like the Posca markers. They actually come pre-activated, and they're a dual brush pen, kind of like a Tombow marker. So they're all ready to go. You've got one end that's a bullet tip, and you've got one end that's a brush tip. It's the craziest thing. They are more sheer than like your Posca markers, or like the other marker. What was the one I really liked? Parkou. I like the Parkou acrylic paint pens because they were cheap and they were reliable and they worked great. And of course, Poscas are the best, I think, in my limited experience in paint pens anyway. But these are neat. These are, I'll try to remember to link it up. I'll try to remember to link all the things that I'm using up. I do use quite a few different things here. So if I forget something, leave a comment, let me know. But that worked great for the stitching. And I chose that because I knew they weren't as opaque as a gel pen or a Posca. And I thought that would just give me that subtle stitching along the edges where the shoelaces go. Now for the shoelaces, I started off with this larger brush here. And I think this was a filbert. No, actually, this was probably like a number 6 round. And I'm pretty sure I switched over to like a 3/16 wide filbert brush because I was having a hard time controlling it. Apparently I haven't yet though. But anyways, I just wanted to get the messy, crazy, twisty looking laces. That was part of what I really liked, just how the laces were just completely wild. Everything just about the stance of the shoes and the craziness of the laces and just how they were sitting on the floor. I just loved everything about it. And I wanted to capture that little snapshot of time. And I mean, I know looking back through if I look back through my phone gallery at the photos and I saw a picture of sneakers, I wouldn't think anything of it. I'd be like, what? Why did I take a picture of that? But painting it, I think makes it special because I also noticed as I was painting it, these don't look like shoes that belong to a 17-year-old. These look like shoes that are much younger. And I don't know if I did that subconsciously or just poor draftsmanship or what, but as I was going through, I was like, these look like little kid shoes. What? Come on. What am I doing here? You know? So yeah, total nostalgia vibes. I don't know. And now here I'm adding some shadow on the laces. And I did use some pre-mixed gray here. I got to say, these are all convenience colors that I'm using here, except for the yellow ochre and the browns, I guess. There's like that burnt umber and kind of like a red iron oxide. I'm using convenience colors. So when you're going to use convenience colors, here's a tip for you. I don't recommend convenience colors for a beginner because it's really easy to get mud. If you look at my palette, look at those colors. They are not vibrant and they're all opaque. And a lot of them lean kind of warm. So that's a recipe for mud. So if you're not that practiced with mixing colors, you might want to go with more pure colors and mix down yourself. But the thing to keep in mind when you are using a really muted palette like this and you're using a lot of convenience colors is that you keep value in mind. So you've got to make sure your darks and lights are in relation to one another. A lot of times people don't go dark enough with their darks. If your values are good, you can paint this neon. It doesn't matter what color you paint. If your values are good, you're going to be fine. Even though I'm using a desaturated palette and I'm using convenience colors, I'm still not using a lot of colors. I've got a green, a blue, a brown, a red, a yellow, and a black. And that's pretty much it. I did grab some gray because I had to stir up the gray pot. It was looking a little like it was starting to separate. So I just used some of that off the toothpick there that I used, but I could use black and white would be the same. But so it's a limited palette. It's still not too many colors, but you just want to be careful when you're using those non-saturated, non-pure colors that you understand color mixing and color theory and that you really have your values down. You got to make sure you get your darks dark enough and you get your, lights light enough and you work within that whole value range so that you've got your best chance of coming up with a good piece of artwork when you're done. But this was fun. Critique Club's all about experimenting. And when I'm doing those lessons, it's all about, pushing the limits and trying out new ideas and experimenting and using different products and just, enjoying it, having a good time. So what I'm doing here is just crispening up. Is that a word? Crispening, making my edges nice and crispy, friends. We're crispy here today. And I'm also I could see through that eyelet there and I wanted to paint some white on the inside. And then I'm just kind of, figuring out where other little details might be. I could see some of the rug through that back eyelet, so I had to paint some of that cream back in there, and then just putting little streaks of dark on the eyelets as well, which I'll actually end up going in with a pencil and sharpening those up at the end. But at this point, I wasn't sure if I was going to do any colored pencil or just leave it as gouache and that little smidgen of pastel. But that's what I like about mixed media is that the sky is the limit. You can do whatever you want. You can throw at it whatever you want to. Just have fun. That I think mixed media is just meant for those who love to experiment. And mixed media is also really good for working without a plan. You might have a vague idea. I had the vague idea. I want to paint these sneakers. I want to capture this moment in time because it's important to me. And mixed media gives me the flexibility that I can kind of start in with a rough sketch. I can paint in with opaque paint, and then I can refine as I go. And I like to do that. I like to kind of work broadly and loose and refine as I go. And everyone has their own working style. You may prefer to draw it and perfect that drawing on scrap paper and then transfer that in and be very meticulous. And that's fine. We all have our own working styles. I do like the broad to tight style because if you make a mistake at the beginning, like I did when I was drawing the shoe, the one that's on the right, and then I had to kind of go in and redraw it or redraw the front of it. When you're working that way, you have that flexibility, because you haven't drawn anything with a lot of detail, so nothing is precious. You don't have to worry about, I've already made this perfect shoelace over here. I can't redraw that shoe now. I'm in too deep, man. I'm in too deep. You don't have to worry about that when you're working loose to tight, because you will catch that error way before you make anything with detail on it. Now I'm starting to do detail, and we're at the tail end of this painting. I'm going in with colored pencils, and I'm using the Derwent ChromaFlows because I kind of want to use them a little bit more. And also, now that they've expanded the range, I've used a set of 24 to nubs, basically. But now they've expanded the range. I want to get a little more comfortable with them because I've been doing a lot of stuff for Derwent lately, and I just want to be able to answer people's questions if they have them. And these are very similar to Prismacolors, maybe not quite as soft, very close though, but I haven't had the breakage problem. I've had maybe 2 tips break off in the set of 72 in my sharpener. And I think my sharpener might be getting kind of dull, which is kind of a bummer because I really like that Jarlink sharpener, but I've noticed it slowed way down over the past couple weeks. And I only got it a couple months ago, so I don't know. I'm kind of I'm going to see how long it takes before it burns out, because I have like an old Office Depot one that I've used for years and years and years. It started to slow down. That's why I switched to the Jarlink one, but this is slowed down quite a bit, and it's not a rechargeable. It's what kind you keep plugged in. But anyway, that was my only breakage I'd had with these pencils, so I'm pretty pleased with that since they are such a soft pencil, and I do expect a certain amount of breakage with a soft pencil, but it's performed really well. I love going in with a pencil with this because I can get those little slivers of dark where I need it. I can add texture to like the canvasy material that the sneakers are made out of. I can add texture onto the rug. You'll see me do that later. And add little sharp details with a sharp pencil. It's just a really great way to tweak things and add detail, and I highly recommend it. Now, something you want to keep in mind though, when you're painting with gouache and you're thinking about doing pencil later, you really be careful when you apply your gouache. You don't have to be that careful because gouache is it's a very flat, matte, almost self-leveling paint, but you can get ridges. So you just want to try to avoid those ridges if you think you're going to go over your painting with pencil in the future. Otherwise, your pencil will catch on those ridges and you'll have a hard time getting like a sharp, crisp line in areas. So just something to keep in your mind if you're going to do gouache. If you know you're going to do a lot of pencil work, then I would just block in things very flat, basic color, and then you could go in with your pencils. But like when I was doing it, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it all gouache or if I'd go in with pencils at all. Now here, I'm going to tighten up that shadow because I want it a little bit darker next to the sneakers, and I want it to feather out a little bit more as it gets further away from the sneakers. Now I like having that base of the pastel because that's going to give me a little bit of uniformness and continuity. But now I can go in with the pencil and I can just bring out a little bit more here and there. Now, something I noticed was that dark line I had under that sneaker on the right was too bold. So I can simply go in with that white pencil and I can get rid of it. I can get rid of it enough that I still have the definition, but I don't have that sharp dark line. And then I can go in with the browns and I can just add little bits of shadow. Now, the lighting was very interesting. We have a big bay window in our living room, and this was sitting on the floor, kind of under the coffee table, right? So the light's coming in from the bay window. It was a very cloudy, rainy morning. It was very diffused light. So there's just a very soft shadow behind the right sneaker. The left sneaker, like the left sneaker shadow is kind of hidden behind both of the sneakers. So there's not a ton of shadow. There was just a little bit maybe at where the two sneakers intersected. So any place I saw shadow, I wanted to get it in there since there was very little. I didn't do anything to stage the lighting here. I just took the photo because I'm like, this is magic. I want to keep this. I want to keep this memory. Because if you don't take the time to observe things, you forget. Even the best of us, we will forget. So yeah, so there you have it. There's the finished artwork. I'm really happy with how it came out, and it was so much fun to paint. I hope you enjoyed this time lapse, and if you'd like to find the real-time video, you can find it in Critique Club. I'll put a link in the video description so you can check it out. $5 a month. You got about 80 real-time tutorials. You get a new creative prompt every month, and you can upload your artwork to get feedback from me. And I love helping people grow as artists, so it's a win-win. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Until next time, happy crafting.